I'm Shyla, Raghav, the Chief Climate Officer of TIME, and I'm really delighted to be moderating a session that's titled Businesses as a Catalyst for Change, which I really think captures the essence of what we're going to be discussing today. When I started working on climate, I will not admit my first COP, climate action was really perceived to be a responsibility of governments, that governments need to sign up for targets and for commitments, and there really wasn't a clear role for businesses to play. Now, we fast forward to 2024, and there's, I think, a very broad, pervasive recognition that the private sector has an inordinate role to play in leading the way, but also in providing the resources and the financing for climate solutions. Of the $3 to $5 trillion necessary for climate action, 80% of that will need to come from the private sector. And so we're delighted to have with us 5 industry-leading experts representing 5 different industries to talk about the role of business, and in particular, how we can foresee businesses leading the way even further as we look at the urgent targets ahead of us. So let me turn to you, Ezgi, first for our first question that is really going to focus on this topic of financial innovation. So we know that there's a lot of capital that will need to be deployed for climate solutions, and the L'Oreal Group itself has really led the way by deploying and delivering and investing more than $1 billion in research and innovation, in green sciences, and even in a nature fund. I mean, following Jane Goodall, I think it's a very important responsibility for businesses to not just decarbonize, but also invest in nature. Can you tell us a little bit more about why L'Oreal invested at that scale and how you see those initiatives actually contributing to your bottom line rather than being a net cost?
Yeah, thank you, Shyla. And wow, it's really humbling to go right after Dr. Goodall for everything that she's done for us and our planet. And you know, we're really incredibly humbled to be on stage following her. So L'Oreal, it's a company born from science 115 years ago. And in everything we do, we put science at the heart of our model. And science really fuels our curiosity. We've got 4,000 plus colleagues around the world, researchers, that are chasing new innovations, new solutions in everything we do and how we serve our consumers, our communities. And this is exactly how we approach climate change and climate action. So yes, there is the climate mitigation angle, but I think increasingly what we're seeing is that there's not enough climate finance that's going into climate adaptation and resilience. So for us, as we were looking to shift our ingredients towards more bio-based ingredients and natural ingredients, we understood that you know, our impact and dependencies on nature was growing. So how do you look to shift your ingredients towards more bio-based while also holding land occupancy flat, while also investing in productivity and yield of agricultural communities around the world? So this was one big topic for us. On one hand, to think about how we approach nature, and then on the other hand was, of course, nature-based solutions, how we need nature to tackle climate change. And you know, what we set out to do 5 years ago, we announced an impact investment fund, a L'Oreal Fund for Nature Regeneration. We committed 50 million euros to look at you know, nature-based solutions to not only generate you know, capture carbon emissions, but also restore 1 million hectares of land around the world while generating jobs. So what we are trying to do is solve for climate change, nature, and social equity, because we really understand that we can't just solve for one and leave the others behind. So this was the intent at the onset of the project. And you know, we surveyed many initiatives and projects around the world. We just validated last year 15 projects, you know, that range from coral reef restoration in Australia to mangrove protection in Southeast Asia to you know, land restoration in the Amazon. And we're learning a lot from these projects. And the idea is, how do you combine financial performance to the creation of environmental and social value? how do we bring data and reasons to believe that this exists, that we can invest in nature and nature capital. So this is what we set out to do, and we look forward to sharing our learnings as the projects mature to try and see how we're bringing that resilience to the communities, to our supply chains, to our sourcing regions around the world. I think this is one aspect. The other one I quickly want to flag here is we also know that there is a lot of climate-related emergencies that are happening around the world and disasters. We're seeing it in the wildfires and the floods all around the world. No region is spared. And we also wanted to really think about not only disaster response, but also disaster preparedness. So last year at Climate Week, we announced another a philanthropic fund, 50 million euros, to invest in climate preparedness and emergency preparedness. Again, this gives us ability to learn, to collect data and science and understand what it takes to build more resilient communities around the world. So all of this, again, to try and solve for climate, nature, and social equity.
Yeah, so it's a triple bottom line, and ultimately you're also taking responsibility for the full value chain, which is really the critical point here. So thank you, Ezgi. Now let's shift industries and now turn to technology, which everyone's been talking about AI. It's the hot topic of the year and will probably continue to grow in importance. Now, Mary, you're at Cisco, and Cisco has committed to reaching net zero by 2040, and technology will be a big part of meeting that goal. You're also known for cutting edge technologies on AI, Internet of Things, blockchain. How are you helping to ensure that these technologies are accessible across industries, especially the sectors that need scalable climate solutions but may lack the infrastructure for the technology?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So wonderful to see you all. And I think you're right. You probably haven't picked up a paper, if anyone actually picks up newspapers anymore, or watch anything that generative AI doesn't show up. And when I think about first generative AI, I do think it could provide some really powerful, positive change for society, but we do need to rethink the network. And we know it's going to require a lot of energy. And so I think we've got to face this challenge head on and not only make sure that we're bringing the right infrastructure, but we also have to make sure that we're providing it for the future that we want. When I think about the rapidly changing kind of digitization, this AI integrated society, we've got to do that in a way that we can also have a livable planet. And so when I think about it, I'm always grappling with kind of technology as well as the kind of the energy providers, the utility leaders, because we need them to probably work faster, smarter, harder. And so I always think about it in some ways is we actually don't have a technology landscape that is ready for sustainability. We actually need to think about, I'd probably say 4 key things. How do we reimagine the data centers for AI? How do we actually modernize the grid? How do we make our buildings smarter and more sustainable? And I always like to think about, like, whatever we connect, how do we make sure we protect it? And so are we actually creating an environment where the grid is secure as well? And so when you think about that, you're hopefully touching all of those folks in the communities, those businesses where we live, work, and create. I do think when you think about some of the technologies, one of the key things to make sure that everyone can take advantage of is first, is there a skilled workforce? And that's one of the areas that we've been investing for over 25 years in this social program, an education program called Networking Academy, to make sure that everyone has the skills, right, to run, to manage networks. But one of the things that I grapple with is what is the technology that we're gonna need in 2030, 2040? And so one of the things that is even as you mentioned, right, how are we putting some patient capital in some of the early stage, whether those are nature-based or technology-based solutions? And often those have to be very local to the communities as well. So how do we connect? How do we secure it? And I think one of the other things is just, this is a space, to me, in sustainability that we should just rapidly be sharing what's working, what's not. How can we talk about how we've developed our own sustainability goals, how are we building out playbooks and sharing that with all industries as well as especially small and medium businesses?
Yeah, and important feature here is partnerships and collaboration across sectors, between sectors, because we also know that the challenges that we're facing are systemic, right? They're not isolated in any one geography or even within an industry.
Absolutely, and I think this is one of the things you mentioned a little bit about kind of climate response. I mean, I think we've all experienced weird weather. And so that's one thing that I think how we can use technology to predict more, to be able to provide more early warning information. I think this is also sometimes when you sometimes grapple with AI and think, energy, but think about what it's going to be able to do for us when you start being able to deploy IoT devices, for example, out into a smallholder farmer that's going to allow us to provide a whole lot of information about the climate, the acidity of the soil, the ability to really do precision agriculture. I think this is another area where we can connect the dots and not just solve, as you mentioned, the kind of climate crisis, but how are we doing it in a just way and providing economic opportunities for everyone.
Yeah, and here we have a tension, of course, with the increased energy demand, but also the promise of the technologies. Let's talk about another tension, Haley. You're at Dow, and I'd love to cover the circular economy and how you think about material innovation, recycling, reuse. You've personally been speaking a lot about the circularity in particular, and this is so important because we know that the amount of plastic that's being produced is set to double by 2040, unless we make drastic and significant changes. What is the most consequential initiative that you're working on at Dow to change the course of where we're headed?
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. So I think as a 125-year-old material science company, we have a significant role to play not only in the decarbonization journey, but also in the circularity journey. So even think our materials go into things like the cables that actually deliver green energy to the grid, also in packaging for cosmetics and food and healthcare to keep products safe and healthy for consumers. And so there's a significant role that we have to play in actually what this decarbonization journey looks like. So as a company, we have set targets for decarbonizing and growing, and actually the circularity aspect, and both of those are rooted in profitability, and they bring significant shareholder returns to us. Over $1 billion that were expected in shareholder returns to be delivered, both cut by decarbonizing our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 5 million tons, and then getting to net zero by 2050, as well as our circularity efforts. So, really advancing the circular economy and 3 million tons of circular renewable products to the marketplace. And so a few things that I'm really proud about in this space are, one, Dow actually is a plastics producer, as you mentioned, but also we just bought a recycler. So now we are a recycling company, and really understanding that we've got to figure out how to keep plastic waste out of the environment, but also how to keep it out and to increase the threshold of material that actually can be built back into the circular economy, and investing in new technologies. Another one is a partnership that we have with P&G to really work on a new solvent-based recycling technology that takes out odors and contaminants and also colorants from the packaging. And we're able to turn that back into a virgin-like quality post-consumer recycled material that P&G can then use in their products. So materials really are at the heart of all of this space and have a significant role to play in the decarbonization and circularity journey.
Yeah, wonderful. And all of you are working within large corporations and are performing sustainability functions. Claire, I'd like to turn to you to talk a little bit about corporate culture and embedding sustainability within the DNA of that corporate culture. What initiative has proven to be the most effective in the context of your industry, and what is really the role of, what are some of the lessons learned in terms of leadership and the importance of leadership in really championing sustainability internally?
Wow, that's a big question. Thank you, and thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I think for a healthcare company, the DNA, and I like the terminology, of the company is already ingrained. It's a healthcare company, and we know climate change and nature loss is a health crisis. It affects respiratory disease, it affects wellness. So there is a direct link in the corporate culture, because that's actually what we do. We make medicines and vaccines. So there is an already ingrained connection on that side. But then the other piece that we've got is, practically, we've got remuneration targets linked to our net zero nature positive commitments, which is an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions across all scopes by 2030. So those remuneration targets are linked across the organization. So that's one area. The second area is we have some amazing, and you've talked about scientists. Well, we're a very science-based, innovation-driven company. Scientists get it. They don't need to be persuaded that climate change is going to be a problem or is a problem. They know it, they understand it. So embedding that into design of medicines is already part of their logic and thinking. And actually, every single medicine that comes through now for GSK, we have embedded eco-design stage gates into every single aspect. So it's already included in how can we avoid emissions or environmental footprint of medicines and vaccines before they even come to the market. So the scientists get it, and they're very passionate about driving it through on medicines as well. And then we also have some brilliant, well, not just young people, but grassroots levels across the organization. We have sort of 70,000 employees globally across 70 different markets. And the grassroots level to drive ownership, change is so strong. We have a group called Earthkind, which has been set up across the company, and they're driving real, tangible impacts, whether it's biodiversity at our sites, whether it's recycling and plastic activities, or whether it's actually coming up with the ideas that are now surfacing up in terms of how can we change the packaging, how can we look at opportunities. So it's across all areas. Remuneration helps, it links it very tangibly there. Scientists, frankly, get it, so they're driving a lot of the change, and that includes innovation on changing old medicines. So inhalers for our company is over 50% of our footprint, the propellant used in respiratory. So unfortunately, while healthcare systems are about 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is about 2.5 times the airline industry, we're also part of the problem. So solving for that and changing the medicines to a new propellant is also driving change across there. And then, like I said, the grassroots, employment, talent retention, that aspect is so strong at the company. So it's not actually difficult. I've hopefully given you some examples of where it's come through, but honestly, once you set the target, set the direction, and actually go for it, it's really coming through strongly.
Yeah, and again, reinforces the fact that embedding sustainability into a company isn't a net cost. It actually pays dividends in terms of talent retention or even in terms of returns. Matt, now let's turn to you and talk about insurance. So you're at American Family Insurance, and you've spoken in the past about the business of pricing risk. But we know that as the climate changes, many individuals and consumers are going to find themselves in difficult situations where their homes or their properties will no longer be insurable. And in particular, because insurers have deemed it to be too risky to sell policies for. So how do you think about making those decisions, in particular where you have to balance the needs of your customer and the consumer and the reality of your risk tolerance as a business?
Yeah, thanks. And certainly, as Mary talked about kind of wild weather, we are on the front lines of that. So for those who don't know American Family Insurance, we're a top 10 provider of home and auto insurance in the country. And our mission is to inspire, protect, and restore dreams. And so when someone's hit by wild weather, we're often one of the first calls made to begin the process of restoring dreams. And so as we think about how we approach this and how we integrate it with climate, we've just recently gone through a process of updating our climate strategy and our sustainable business framework. And it was very intentional that we did so, working from both our core commitment to operate more sustainably, achieve our net zero targets, but also cascaded through the community investments we make to build community resilience, because we know that has an impact on our bottom line, but then also explicitly talk about maintaining and investing advantage in climate risk data. And we do that through partnerships with academic institutions where we're contributing to overall scientific knowledge, but also through proprietary efforts that we use to try to price risk more effectively and be able to stay in markets by balancing our risk approach. And then also through product innovation, because we know that perhaps our greatest opportunity for change is in the relationships we have across 15 million policies that we hold, in relationships that are often durable and long-lasting. And so we're really thinking about ways that we can partner with our customers to do proactive prevention, because the best thing we can do is avoid the waste associated with the climate disaster. And that's a ripe area for partnership. It won't just be with the insurers, it'll be with other insurers, it'll be with other partners in the industry, government, that are all gonna have to come along on a journey of helping us as an industry be able to meet customers in their evolving risk landscape and provide solutions to that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that all of you touched on innovation. So it's really refreshing to see that that's a common thread and a common feature that in all of your companies. I'd like to now cover two themes. First is policy. We're of course in an election year in this country. We're not going to talk specifically about the election, but I'd really like for us to reflect on the critical ways in which companies and the government, the public sector, can collaborate towards shared outcomes and partnerships. So again, reflecting on the systems level nature of what we're addressing, how do we leverage the promise of partnerships? So let's start on the policy issue. So Ezgi, I'd like to kick it over to you to talk a little bit about some of the initiatives and your L'Oreal's work with governments and stakeholders in particular to complement the business efforts that you spoke to.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier how, in everything we do, we're really pursuing innovation and sustainability and bringing that curiosity forward. And okay, how do we turn this into reality? How do we tackle these real world challenges, that this doesn't really stay a theoretical ambition, but we're actually truly steering conversations, partnerships, and really thinking through what are the enabling environments that are needed to accelerate the transformation, to catalyze innovation. And I think, we operate all around the world, and ultimately what we really find out is that governments want to know that business supports policy and regulation, and business does. If you think about it, we understand the importance of EPR laws, for example, the extended producer responsibility laws. We understand the importance of land protection, nature protection. So it is important. The business will always have a bias towards action, moving fast, finding the solutions, the innovations, but we also like to operate within a frame. So how do we create those frameworks? How do we become part of the public debate and helping build those, what I would call regulatory backbones that support this transformation, provide the right incentives, grants, subsidies? I think these are the questions. And in many cases, what we can do as business is we can bring science and data forward because we have it and we collect it from all around the world, and we understand the local context, the challenges, what could work in one market versus another. So I think this is the approach, and there's many ways we do this. We do it through our industry associations, industry groups. We do it in conversations with local authorities in areas where we operate. But yeah, I think ultimately, trust is built on transparency and consistent action. So how do we continue to build that transparent dialogue with all the stakeholders, be it the civil society, the governments, the startup community? We talked about innovation. Once you start thinking through that, that an open and honest dialogue is always going to help you move forward.
And maybe I'll ask each of you to just very quickly reflect on this topic so that we can address our final one before we conclude. So Haley, just some quick remarks on policy.
Yeah, I think policy is a key lever to de-risk technology and help provide incentives. As you mentioned, EPR policy, but right now the UN is negotiating a global plastic pollution treaty. And that is really designed to get plastic out of the environment and ultimately drive economic value with the circular economy. And some policy drivers that are absolutely critical are EPR that she mentioned, and mandatory recycled content targets. And so these are two policy levers that businesses are asking for and frankly saying, like, we need that. Voluntary action has only gotten us so far. And it is very important, and partnerships are critical to actually addressing these big world challenges, but they've only got us so far. So the real accelerator is actually going to be policy to drive that further.
And Mary, you've been leading the charge on public-private partnerships. Can you tell us a little bit about what Cisco's doing with the public sector?
Yeah, I think anyone who, first of all, speaks scopes or understand and read the greenhouse gas protocol realize within the framework, interdependency and partnership is there. There's no way we're going to get there without working together. And even just touching a little bit upon the opportunity of generative AI and the energy demand, that is really critical for us to work with local organizations, those local governments, to make sure, right, that they're investing in net new clean energy. So that's an area. One of the things when you think about power purchase agreements, it is usually one that we're working very closely with the local governments as well.
Fantastic. All right, Matt and Claire, over to you on a partnership that you'd like to highlight. Maybe just one example.
Yeah, I'd just build off what Ezgi said. You know, research is really the core of building productive partnerships with government. We do that through industry partners. We're researching roof quality on a regular basis. What's the most resilient building materials, so that we can take that and talk about ways that can be folded into regulatory environments, and also outside of the industry too, with unlikely partners. So we're partnering with XPRIZE Wildfire on a 4-year, $11 million effort to come up with innovative solutions to wildfire, whether that's space-based detection or autonomous firefighting of wildfires, and something we're really excited about.
I think if I was to give one example, it would be the Sustainable Markets Initiative, where it's a public-private partnership across the healthcare task force and system. So it's pharmaceutical companies, it's healthcare systems, it's hospitals, and actually putting in place solutions. So we've broken down sort of the barriers of we can't work with peers and competitors, and actually we are. And we've put in place solutions where suppliers, and it doesn't matter whether you're a supplier to us or to any of the other companies around there, we've set up opportunities for renewable contracts in Europe and the US, and we're launching in other markets, which is actually to take down some of the barriers for why can't suppliers in our supply chain move to renewable electricity. Some of them may not have procurement departments or legal teams to be able to do that. So trying to take some of those barriers down, we've done that collectively. And that has moved, and there'll be some announcements this week, but it is working in partnership across peers and with private and public sector as well to actually put in place real solutions.
Wonderful. Okay, my final question that will be for all of you is really refers to the state of play when it comes to net zero goals and targets. So we know that at the global level, we have to be halving our emissions every decade and moving towards net zero by 2050. Many companies have adopted science-based targets to follow that pathway. But we've also now seen that many companies are encountering challenges with following that pathway and that trajectory. And we've also seen that in many cases, the path to net zero is not linear. And many companies are missing those milestones along the way. I'd like all of you to reflect on your own journey with net zero and in your company context. Have you personally seen this challenge of having to miss a target, miss a goal? How have you dealt with it internally? How have you balanced the need to be transparent with public opinion? This, for me, is something that's been on my mind quite heavily over the last few months, and I'd love for all of you to reflect on it. So we can go in any order if anyone's compelled to start.
Maybe I'll
Ezgi.
go. I'll bring it back to science. The scientific field is not linear. It's exponential. You know, if you look at advanced research, that's how science evolves. So I think this is one approach we can think of climate action. Yes, it's not going to be linear, and yes, maybe we may hit roadblocks, or we may feel that the low-hanging fruit has been picked. But ultimately, as we learn to reach for those higher branches, we're going to know that we're going to need additional partners, we're going to need the policy environments, et cetera. And I think, once you start seeding the market in terms of what you're looking for, in terms of innovation, in terms of that enabling environment in different local markets, that's when you're going to start seeing an acceleration. And in many cases, we often think of, the biggest barrier is actually lack of innovation. I would disagree. I think the biggest barrier is a lack of scale. So how do we really think of moving beyond pilot projects or demonstration scale initiatives or individual wins, and really thinking about how do we catalyze change? How do we really bring the entire ecosystem forward. I mean, we just announced a 3-party partnership with Abolis and Evonik, a startup biotech company and a specialty manufacturer that can help us bring this biotechnology that will help us, bring more green sciences and improve our portfolio towards more bio-based ingredients, bring it to industrial scale. So we know that the innovation is out there, but we also know that we cannot just get in a partnership with a startup. We also have to think about who's the industrial player, who can come in and really help us scale these initiatives. And this takes time, and we learn. And then once you learn and you find the right partnerships, you will see an acceleration. So I think we have a lot of reasons to believe. And like I said, scientific field is not linear, it's exponential. So we can think of it that way. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Mary.
I think it's all about transparency. So if I think about Cisco, I definitely did not see that linear reduction. Why? COVID hit. There was a lot of shifts and change in terms of supply chain. So you saw that decrease, and then all of a sudden, the orders and the shipping came in. So it's about transparency. I don't think you can have trust without transparency. What is that underlying data? And then probably using a lot of scenario planning, because there's no way any of us will reach net zero alone. So how do you understand what's in your control, model that with all the external factors as well?
And the only other thing I would add is when we actually talked about our Decarbonize and Grow strategy to our investors, we prepared the roadmap for them. And it looks like a jagged mountain going down. And there are ups and downs, and I would say that's what the pathway looks like, but we have to be willing to roll some big dice in this space. And we invested $6.8 billion in a new cracker complex to actually make scope 1 and 2 low emission products for our customers, and customers are interested in this. But I would also say another pathway to get there has been like biomaterials, and biomaterials typically cost 50 to 70% more. Some people like Lego have been saying they're willing to pay for those, and they're taking some of those big bets, and as economies and the supply starts to scale. But these are all instances where we're looking for new innovation to lower carbon inputs as well, like biomaterials, agricultural waste, those types of things. But ultimately, they have to scale. And so, like you said before, the path is not linear, but the commitment is still there to get there.
Great.
Yeah, I would just say, I think it's a great question. It is 100% true. It requires a continual evaluation of what your highest leverage points are along that path, and those changes. The environment changes. It changes when COVID hit. It was an opportunity for us to invest in sustainable aviation fuel because we had a lower amount of travel occurring, but we helped to create some amount of market demand at that critical moment for that industry. And so as we go along our path towards net zero, we will continually be evaluating where we can make high leverage investments.
Great. Claire, last word.
Thank you. Well, it's just from a healthcare perspective, I'd say it's definitely not going to be non-linear, because you want to make sure that the medicines, if you're changing, are working, effective, and still doing what they need to do. So we're very heavily regulated, rightfully so. You won't see a sudden drop until we've actually gone through clinical trials, testing, regulator approvals. So actually, it won't be linear, because we actually have to go through a lot of testing, rightfully so, before you then start seeing changes in existing medicines and vaccines.
Great. Well, thank you all for your candor, for your openness, for your insights during this panel. Congratulations on all your accomplishments and your leadership, and I'm so excited to see what each of you will accomplish moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much.